Oh, yeah.
No, I was just gonna say you could probably just put it up somewhere and just leave the shot like that.
I like that.
Probably here would be a good spot. Oh, yeah, that's even better. Yeah, that's perfect. Just gotta get it to stand up.
This had some good volume to it. Here, can I try using this?
Yeah. I would not want this posted on Facebook yet. It's not finished.
I was joking. I'm not thinking.
Yeah, I would post it on Facebook if it was finished. I'd be like, oh man,
I would never with that
it'd just be an
information.
ego trip thing. But I mean, this is not something I could ego trip.
It would just buy credibility to the.
Okay, sweet. Okay. My girlfriend's so nice. She gave me a laser pointer that she used for her presentation. So.
Shoot, I didn't know that.
Point at us if we're not listening.
Oh, it's not strong enough to show up on screen.
Huh?
No.
Oh, yeah.
Worse.
This would be awesome for cats, but I hate cats, so. Okay, so this is basically a preliminary kind of study. It's like trying to see if this would be an interesting, possibly good subject to look at. And the research idea is, to what extent does racism impact anti-immigration attitudes? So there's a couple motivations for this. So first, immigration is a very good thing. Wait, do I have the wrong slide? I have the wrong slide too. No, I don't. I have the But, okay. So, immigration is a very good thing for several reasons. One, immigration really helps the poor. So if you're in India, your average wage is going to be around $1,500 adjusted for everything. It's incredibly low and a really low standard of living. Whereas if that one man or woman from India comes to America, they can start making $35,000 within a couple of years, massively increasing their wages, treating poverty. Secondly, I mean, if we look at the economic studies on immigration, we see very little effect on native wages and native employment in the long run. And we see very little impact of crime from immigration in the long run. So it doesn't really affect people who are living in the area currently, but it really helps the poor there. So it seems like it should be an obvious winning policy, more immigration. But then we get to the motivation two. It's like Donald Trump and.
Can you shine just a little bit to the just tiny bit?
I don't even know who's on the right.
That's Ted Cruz.
Seriously?
That's Ted Cruz?
Yes.
I've never seen his picture. Okay.
Huge
Yeah.
asshole.
They're huge assholes,
I'd
but
say Ted Cruz is a bigger asshole than Trump.
he
Scary,
is
scary
absolutely.
asshole.
Ted Cruz there was this story about Ted Cruz where he was a lawyer. He goes and his main thing was death penalty cases. So for his protege, the guy who was mentoring him, he made a painting where it showed him and his mentor, and surrounded were by a bunch of gravestones that represent the people they sent to execution for the death penalty. He's a psychopath. He literally was bragging about all the people he sent to death in this painting he made for his mentor. But anyway, their two main ideas are basically restricting immigration, deporting immigrants who are here undocumentedly, and hating Muslims. So if immigration is such a good policy, then why is immigration so disliked? And my idea is, well, much of this dislike may come from racism. So to test this, I looked at data from the American National Election Studies 2012, respected organization. Sample size is 5,390, and the dependent variable is, do you think immigration should be decreased or increased? Basically, what do you want for immigration? And so now we get to the more difficult, questionable part of it, where it's like, what I decided to do was there are 13 questions that could come from racial biases. So questions like, was Obama born in the United States? Or stuff like, or are you for or against affirmative action? Where it's like, one or two of those answers, it may just be not racism, it may just be your own opinion. But if you start answering like 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 out of the questions in the same way that goes against what like the NAACP would answer, then it starts getting to be more of a trend when you keep the possibly racist questions, you keep answering yes to them. So basically, we're going to sum up the answers to yes to the possibly racist questions, and then go and use each of these as a dummy variable and try to measure the impact of racism from these variables. And there's other variables that are important with immigration: fear of immigrants taking jobs, fear of crime, if you're a libertarian, religious, what political affiliation you have, how much wealth you have. I mean, I included all of those in immigration as well. They're all in the data. It's a really great data set. There's actually 3,000 variables in the data set. It's pretty insane. Okay, so there's 5 categories that someone taking the survey could select. They could either from increase immigration a lot, increase it a little, and keep it the same level, decrease it a little, and decrease it a lot. So we need a model that works for a dependent variable that can only take on 5 values. So we use the multinomial logic to estimate it. That's the standard. So first I'll talk about the logic model, because the multinomial logic is basically just an extension of the logic model, and the logic model is more intuitive to explain the multinomial logic model. I didn't get the intuition as much. My teacher didn't focus on that as much, so I'm not that good at explaining it yet. But basically, the logic model is trying to estimate the parameters for a dependent variable that can only take values of 0 or 1. The logic model is y equals 1 if the variables plus the error term are greater than 0, or y equals 0 otherwise. And then you set up that model, and then the computer uses maximum likelihood to find beta, and X is a matrix of data that's already given. So we just use maximum likelihood to find the betas. And in the logic model, we have a logistic error term. The logistic distribution is basically just a normal distribution, except extreme events have a higher probability of happening. So pretty similar to the normal distribution, but it actually looks kind of nicer than the normal distribution, actually, because it's so simple compared to the ugly, awful term. Okay, here are the variables I included in here. I don't know why I use we sometimes. So
It's
often.
because you're a mathematician.
We.
There aren't proofs like we
Yeah.
don't.
But anyway, so diet R, J is basically, they had J, they answered yes J times to the 13 questions that could possibly be racist. Diet R 10M is they answered 10 or more of these questions yes, because after we got to 10, 11, 13, the sample size got lower and lower, as you would expect. Take jobs means that the individual believes that immigrants take jobs. Economic anxiety means they're worried about their future. Libertarian was coded as, do you think there should be more government or less government? So if they selected less government, I code them as libertarian. Probably not entirely accurate, but a decent estimate possibly.
That's a good question.
Yes.
Doesn't that survey have like a political affiliation question?
Most people did not answer the political affiliation question, which disappointed me actually. A lot of people seem to be like, oh, I'm above both parties.
I have a question too, but if it's too far from tangent, please let me know.
Nope.
But like a lot of times, these actually you run through like psychometric kind of analysis. I don't know. Is that ever something you worry about, like cron box alpha stuff? I haven't encountered yet in my master's.
No, there's not. I'm going to need to test to see if the variables I'm trying to use to measure racism are actually measure racism, and that's going to be the really difficult part, but this is just assume that these variables are a proxy for racist attitudes. Then these results follow. So I've got part 2 done, just not part 1 done. So
What's the psychometric analysis?
So it's kind of like how what test makers, their techniques they use to get the most reliable, valid results out of questions. It's a survey kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, I haven't, but I know that a big measure of it, and it's calculable, there's actual a strength of reliability, and that's a Cronbach's alpha gives you, I don't know how it's made, but if you look it up, maybe, yeah, you can learn backwards. It's been a while, but Cronbach's alpha determines that somehow. Yeah.
So if you own savings means you have money in the bank, own stocks means you own stocks. These are proxies for wealth, which are proxies for income. Wealth and income data was not provided because they felt it was too personal of information. Expecting a terror attack, this was in 2012, if someone expected there to be a terrorist attack that killed over 100 people on U.S. soil in 2013, basically that kind of tries to measure just fear of the unknown or fear of crime. Right there's a proxy.
Was the actual question over 100?
Yes.
Wow.
And a lot of people said yes. So a lot of people are actually expect massive terror attacks every year, which is kind of weird. Anti-science, this was the one where I just threw it in here because I was interested, but there was one question where it said, should the government use the scientific method? And there were like 500 people in making policy decisions. And there were like 500 people that answered never do it.
It's gotta be a misunderstanding. or something.
And I was just like, maybe people aren't don't care about immigration research because they hate science. So maybe include that as a variable. That was just fun for me.
Not a bad guess.
Racist just means if someone was out and out blatantly racist, they answered yes to, do you think blacks or Hispanics are dumb or lazy? So just pure, over the top, extreme racism right there.
Do you remember roughly how many answered yes to that?
We were like 500 people. So,
5,000?
yeah.
Oh my
Maybe
God.
like,
Participants in the survey?
what?
How many participants and who were they?
5,390. So it was a survey that, it wasn't representative of the population, but they used a weighting scale that made it representative of the overall U.S. voting population. So
What was the population?
the population was just, they went to people's homes and asked a bunch of people there.
Across
So,
the United States?
yeah, in the United States. Yeah, it was, I think I mentioned that at the beginning, it's the United States election.
Did they like have a plan for random selection in terms of like neighborhood difference in economic neighborhoods?
They didn't randomly select people because they know that random selection can sometimes leave some minority groups being underrepresented.
Sure.
So instead they used weights for the representation. So they made sure to weight everything to make sure to get a good sample of each and every type of person. And I include the weights in the regression. And religious is there's some people that say that because churches are very welcoming of immigrants, churches are very welcoming of immigrants, of refugees, that being religious would make attitudes towards immigration, well, sometimes would make attitudes toward immigration more positive. So if someone said that their religion was extremely important to their identity, I count them as religious. So I don't
know. I thought they were like, I don't know. But maybe I don't know.
So let's look at the results here. So, as we would expect, when you answer just a few of these questions with affirmatives, these possibly racist questions, the coefficients are not very large and it's not very significant. But when you get to like 10 or more of them, then you have a 22% more likely chance of ending up saying that you think immigration should be reduced a dramatic amount. And 9, you have a 17% chance. 8, you have a 14% increased chance. And this isn't like something where, I know this font is shitty and it's not big enough, but, and this isn't like some other times where it's like, increase it, like your rate of a heart attack increases by 50%, but your risk of a heart attack is only 0.1%. It's not like that because around 20% of people answered immigration should be decreased a great amount. So these are real substantial differences. The statistical significance is extremely high for these dummy variables. One other interesting thing we see is that the fear of taking jobs is still the overwhelming biggest influencer on whether or not you think that immigration should be decreased a lot. So that shows that we still have some education possibly to tell people that, hey, immigration doesn't take jobs. Economic anxiety also makes it so that you are more likely to want to reduce immigration. Liberal and conservative, slightly less. Anti-science, you want to decrease immigration more, so that kind of fit my hypothesis. The amount of wealth you own actually doesn't change your views on immigration that much according to these estimates. Because
Isn't that what you'd expect? If people who are afraid about losing their jobs are against it, people who have money don't give a shit?
no, it's that you would expect that, but you would expect some effect for people who are rich to be. Well, you expect that if you don't own stocks, that you would have, or don't have any savings, you'd be more economically vulnerable, poorer, so you'd want less immigration.
Oh, sure.
But there's no effect,
I'm with you.
so I don't know why I'm not invested, so. And religion doesn't really have an impact, libertarian doesn't really have an impact, and yeah, the pure racists were slightly less dramatic, but again, the sample size is very low for them. If we look at the next category of immigration should be decreased a little, we see all the same signs here for the variables that really matter, similar coefficients, so that would seem that these results could be plausible. But again, the main thing is I have to prove in a different step that these variables that do actually serve as a proxy for racism and aren't just measuring something else. I think that's plausible, but plausibility isn't proof. So I've got part 2 done. This was part 2. Now for the more difficult part of establishing the variables is valid.
And so this is with all of the other controls that we talked about. You control for age, geography.
They didn't have age, they didn't have geography.
Huh.
Obviously those are important though, so.
Yeah.
Very
only four of
important.
those in there.
So, the reason why, so your outcome are these kind of two, they're almost like attitudes. So would kind of the use of this analysis is ultimately to affect action that will change attitudes?
I think that if we show that racist attitudes limit the amount of immigration into the United States, and there is some I do have some policy purpose for this, and that I would like for really rich people who are libertarians to take a more serious stand towards racism. And rich libertarians really like immigration, so if they think that racism is reducing immigration, then it might make sense for rich libertarians to go and try to combat racism some more. So it does have a policy application to it, definitely. And for people that want to help the poor in other nations by allowing them to immigrate, it shows areas where we should focus on changing public opinion so that we can more easily help the poor in other nations that want to immigrate to the United States. So there are definitely policy applications here, but also just kind of an interesting question.
And I think that kind of stuff is I think my favorite example was like tobacco usage and stuff. A big part of that was a mix of the policy changes where, taxes and no smoking in bars and that kind of stuff. That making it a nuisance. And then education went up, science went up, knowledge. And it was just as much about changing attitudes, mixed with policy, that really decreased the public health scare or whatever. But yeah.
Any more questions?
So UIDX is your model parameters?
No, those are not the coefficients. These are the marginal effects of the multinomial model, since the coefficients of multinomial are difficult to give an intuitive explanation for. It's just kind of hard to show these numbers, and it's like, but these don't really mean anything intuitively, and then just move on to the next slide, which is this. So I just skip that step to save slides.
The way that Satan does these is it'll take the mean
Mhm.
of every variable
Mm-hmm.
and it'll calculate the outcome,
Mm-hmm.
and then it will change only one of the variables by 1 unit, whatever unit happens to be.
Mhm.
It'll calculate it again and it'll take that difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the DYDX is, which is super rough, because that's not what DYDX means, but that's like the discrete approximation
Mhm.
of what a marginal effect would be.
Any more questions?
Usually with logit models, I always think odds ratios,
Mhm.
and I'm, 59, and we're not even close to regressions and stuff, so it's been a long time. Where, are there interpreted odd ratios that you can?
I don't
does that
like
even make
odds.
sense?
I don't like, you
Makes no
could use
sense, yeah.
odds
Makes
ratios.
sense,
I
okay,
don't like odds
Good luck explaining that
ratios.
to someone who's never had stats before.
Yeah.
They're just-
Yeah, I mean, the multinomial model is actually motivated from the odds ratio sometimes, the log of the odds.
Mhm.
But that's just, it's difficult to kind of come up with an intuitive explanation
Yeah.
for log of one number over another number, and one probability over another probability, and then it's a series and sum of probabilities, and it's not very intuitive, so skipped it.
One thing that I would consider doing is you could present those responses in a number of ways. So you could start out with pretend that it's approximately continuous and
Mhm.
treat it as one variable.
Yeah.
Obviously that's super sketchy, but just start out with that because I think that's intuitive for
Mhm.
people. Then you can make it discrete, like you could literally based on that make the cutoff more than 5 or less than 5
Mm-hmm.
and show a discrete outcome.
Mhm.
And then you could do this. And I think that I don't know. Seems like it'd be a
Yeah.
great way to present things.
That would be a way to present things, but this is just the way to be the super safe way of
Sure,
presenting
no, for
things
sure.
to start.
We
but
should
yeah.
definitely end with this. This is a valid way to
Yeah.
do it. Neither of those
Yeah.
other ways are valid. One other thing is like, I think one issue you might have is that you're kind of measuring one thing with different variables, like own stocks and have savings.
Mhm.
It's kind of measuring the same thing.
Well, it's kind of different. It's kind of different because actually the mean of own stocks is 0.42 and the mean of have savings is 0.71. So 71% of people have money in the bank, 42% own stocks. So if it kind of is, if you own stocks, you're pretty wealthy. If you have savings, you're not poor. So it's kind of like showing two levels. So if you have both savings and stocks, you're probably upper middle class. If you have at least savings, you're probably not poor, and if you have no savings, you're poor. So it's kind of just showing levels of wealth.
You should definitely interact those terms then. You
Yeah.
can answer those questions. If there's a difference between really rich people and kind of okay people.
Yeah, but I would think that own stocks would kind of have savings included in it. If you own stocks, I would think you have savings also. So it might also
Not
be.
necessarily, like, some people don't trust, some people think they can make a better return.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily, but I would expect the correlation
You
to
can
be
find
high.
out.
Yeah,
So
I'll
this is-
find.
I'm trying to understand like how much of this type of talking should go into your decision making and your analysis, as in like you're like thinking about how the world works. I think that's a great way because then you're, but also that's already instantly adding some kind of bias, right? I mean, so like I'm just curious. I'm just not there yet. Does that kind of, do you get to a point where you're just kind of, you can take yourself completely, like you throw all the variables on there and see what happens and then make
That's what I was about to ask, so you said there were like 3,000?
Yeah, there are 3,000 variables.
So could you run the logic model on the entire feature set, check out the marginal effects?
You would run
and
out,
plus-
Yeah, and say that the state of the schoolhouse can only actually accept 2,048, so I had to actually feed it into a Python script, which translated it to Excel, and then took the variables I wanted out of Excel, and then translated them back to a DTA file, and then regressed on that.
Is multinomial legit equivalent to the logistic classification? Like in say machine learning or
I'm not certain on that.
I mean, the model looked the same from the initial slides, but there could be different assumptions or different. That would be interesting, though.
Yeah.
It was, it's relatively simple model, you probably run it in just Python alone.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, but I kind of suck at Python. I'm not that great at it. I can use it, but not that great.
If you want help, hey.
One thing that's like standard in econ that I've discovered maybe isn't so standard in like math or like computers, like non-social fields is that you would be frowned upon quite heavily if you just threw in everything and saw what stuck to the wall.
Mhm.
Like generally the approach is you need to have
Theory is
theoretical
better
reason.
than
Yeah.
data.
It's like very frowned upon if you just don't, like you just throw everything and see what works.
Mhm.
It's
It's
more
funny,
like,
because, I mean, you would think that you'd have a pretty good theoretical basis for throwing in everything and then looking at what
Mm.
has a high effect.
no,
You
I mean
would-
like a theoretical basis for like, I believe that, being rich or poor has an effect on something that tests it out.
Yeah, no, that's good for the particular
Cross-validating.
question. In particular.
What's wrong with cross-validating?
Mhm.
Well, cause
Well, I
Throw them in
mean,
anyways,
you're
even
just,
sometimes.
you're just increasing your odds of finding an effect.
yeah, I
It's
mean,
so
let's say I
specific
have,
example.
let's say I have 3,000 variables, and none of them are actually significant, but there's a 1% chance that one of them, just by pure chance, is significant. I'm gonna end up with 30 significant variables,
Yeah.
even though none of them have a real
Right.
effect on there. And then I'll be presenting
yeah.
results on 30 variables.
That's why it's looked at kind of fishy, if you don't have like a theoretical
Mhm.
reason for every variable.
Oh my God, that is a beautiful explanation.
Richard Bach,
I love it.
my hero.
I totally
So
understand
we say all the
why
time,
you don't do that now.
You know what I've done?
I mean, that eliminates any doubt in my mind.
Right.
That's it, that,
So you're saying that those 30 random like you threw everything at it, those 30 random variables, like, just by chance you're going to get something significant,
Yeah.
whether or
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
it's actually.
Whether it's actually
predicting
relevant or
something
not, it
actually
has to make sense or be
Yeah.
supported by prior research for you to include it in there, or else you run into the kind of just getting a good result by pure chance and it's all bullshit thing.
It's even harder, like if you accept the 5% alpha level,
Mhm.
you got 150 variables that will sneak through.
so what is it that you do then that says that the variables that you picked weren't part of that 1%, just in a normal study?
I can't tell.
You have to argue
That's
from
his own
theory, so you
intuition,
have
I
to.
mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of like his
Intuition,
own,
theory.
like, prior
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like that you made the
Side-
choice prior to
side-
looking?
Yes.
Okay, but so is there a test or a validation that
He
you?
test.
Mhm.
He test.
It's an
Yeah.
expertise kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Well, I mean, you can never show that you actually have an effect just from one study. You'll probably need to do like 20 studies
Yeah.
or so, then do a meta-analysis on all of those studies.
Yes. Top
You
of the
never
chain.
know, but-
Mhm. Yeah, but this is some evidence that these variables have an effect. But again, I need to make sure even more plausible that these variables actually do measure racial bias instead of it just seeming plausible.
Yeah. Definitely try and get your hands on like demographic stuff, 'cause
Mhm.
it's not bad, no one's gonna buy it.
No.
So, you definitely gotta have that. So, I mean, you should be able to find it, cause I've used this data set before.
You have?
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember getting age and state. even like
Okay,
that.
I'll double check it
Yeah.
then. I mean, I must have just gotten bored since scrolling through all those variables,
For
not
sure.
being able to find
You should be
it.
able to download a code book though.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay.
or where is it?
What's that?
It's on the ANES
Yeah.
website.
It's just like an election.
Yeah.
It's not a government body, is it? It's like, it's.
No.
They're Penn State, I think, or something.
Thank you.
John, Richard Bach.
Especially the Ted Cruz asshole slide. Yeah.
My hero.
Yeah, it's from American National Election Studies.
It's a
They're-
good data set.
Yeah, it's a good data set. They have data sets actually back to like 1960 as
Go
well.
back to all the correlations you just made, go back to the table results. Right there, so I have a question does anyone use data and stats at the same time? Right, and so you can do that marginal probability with data, so we're using the vendors, and like, no way
No one can do that.
to doing stats, which is.
Really?
So she's hard, why are you messing
Are you
around
a
with these?
reader? I'm a reader about it. Not.
There's
no
only
more
answer to
pediatrics, no, sorry, this time, like, all they get is.
The whole pediatric department of it?
Right, and all they get
I
out
wish
is
our
just
department
odds ratios.
You could like write your own.
Whoever did it made it
So you guys have
I always
a
did.
programmer, you could literally.
It was actually one of
program
on my
the
Excel
procedure
sheet of
that's
picking
in
schools.
Yeah,
and
you
trying
can
to
make
research
your
which
own
program you
Yeah.
can like
It's gonna be very hard, like the way I
use
understand it,
to
it's just literally just algebra.
And
Like, what you do, like,
yeah.
you just need to program it.
Biostatistics
So if you have any programmers,
is
what do you
100%,
use?
because the FDA
Reader,
requires
reader,
everything to be
reader
in
should
SAT.
mention that he's got a guy.
So
Because
if you're in
we're a public health
biostatistics, you gotta
nonprofit world.
understand. Yeah.
Very nonprofit world.
It's just that until and when and if the FDA changes it, but if you submit, if you're trying to get anything approved, if you're trying to show them anything, if you submit any report to the FDA, they're required to be in SAS, they're required to be a SAS report, and so that is why biostatistics still uses SAS, because the FDA requires it.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
You are?
Huh,
You're
interesting.
looking at-
And so that may or may not ever change.
Already
It hasn't
has
changed.
kind of things with R.
So-
Screwed. Second like R is the way you have to.
Wait, you're like actually the teacher on
Screwed.
CIS
Like,
that comes up?
all of
Yeah,
education
just to the lab.
endorses. Like, so if you're going, like, you said, yeah, like, a lot of your things, oh, yeah, R is accepted in a dissertation, so almost everybody's doing it now.
Oh, it is.
You have R.
As if others are not though, like SAS and Stata.
So you wanna do my deal?
SAS did all of it. And then I have no
Who's gonna
idea.
change like 20 jobs a year?
But R is, in the
For
dissertation,
year.
there is nothing, like, even racist about it at all.
Your quiz okay?
It's totally fine, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. So we think SAS and Stata know me pretty well. I'm getting better and better at work, honestly.
It's like resistance.
Is
But it's simple and.
you know, I'm not gonna be, I'm not gonna be stuck in it, hopefully.
I'm like, resistance.
I guess it's trying to-
So
I'm
there's,
trying to
in the crew,
understand
there's like
the
5 different
intricacies of
classes.
programs.
And
Programs
every
to
term
try
they passed out 2
spend that
class
time
cards, and you look at them and then lie about what they are.
If you're going
If each
into
class supposed to do a
biostatistics,
specific
the
action,
answer
take
is
them
that,
down, or like
not just me.
assassinate people.
Yeah,
or
and then the reason is just that we use one
Take it, take a
code
card,
and one
take a card.
analyze.
You wanna try
See,
and-
Yes.
so
Yes.
any of those-
Analyze the state.
You get really good at
SAS,
that,
right?
yeah, you're super valuable.
It's like a resistance.
super clean SAS data.
Longitudinal
set.
helps on the hard,
Yeah.
because that's what he does.
So, who wants to present next?
I can do something if you don't have anything. This is over, right?
Not next week. I'll put something together.
Hit that stop on the top thing.